Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ibukun Williams, and if you remember, we spoke about a couple of things in the last video, which was about the ISO in itself. And I remember I told you guys I was going to talk about the other two elements, which is the shutter speed and the aperture. If you remember the ideology that I started with, I also still said you needed light, you needed a hole, and you needed something like a receiver to receive this light on the other side. The shutter speed in itself is the time it takes for that hole to open up and close. The shutter speed is what we are going to be talking about today. Let's dive in. Now, if you look at the camera has a sensor inside, and this sensor is actually completely covered by a shutter. And now, when it's completely covered, the sensor, there's literally no light entering the sensor. So what happens is that when you take your camera and you press that shutter button, and you do, and you hear, most of us hear that sound. So it's the shutter opening. When you hear it opens and it closes. So it could open for a long time, and close, and boom, that is the image being made in real time. So because we want to capture a lot of things, that's why you see a lot of times it opens fast and like that. The shutter speed in itself is the time it takes for that shutter in the camera to open and close as it's exposing the sensor to light. Let's not forget that the ISO in itself is the sensitivity of the sensor to light. So as the shutter opens and closes, it affects the sensor, even though we can still determine how sensitive that sensor is by changing the ISO. But as far as the shutter speed is concerned, we can also change it for different reasons entirely. Now, the first thing I want you to notice about the shutter speed, if you look at it from a real life point of view, if you have the sensor and the shutter opens for a while and closes, there's a lot of time for the light to enter the sensor. However, if the shutter opens for a brief moment, there's really not much time for light to enter or to touch or to reach the sensor as compared to the first situation. So if you look at it very well, the faster that shutter speed is, the faster the shutter opens and closes, the less time it has to take in light into the sensor. So in the real sense, the darker the picture would get. If you give it more time to open, there will be more time for the sensor to take in all that light, the brighter the picture. So when the speed of the shutter is fast, the faster the shutter speed, and I feel like we'll start off with this first theory. The faster the shutter speed, the darker the picture gets, because it's taking a faster time to open and close. However, the slower the shutter speed, the more light comes into the picture, the brighter the picture gets. Alright guys, so now that we've established that the shutter speed is the time it takes for the shutter to open and close, we've also established that the longer that shutter speed is, the more light comes into the picture, the brighter the picture gets, and the faster that shutter speed is, the darker the picture gets. That is the operation. That is how the shutter speed operates. But if we have to talk about the behavior, think about it this way. The shutter speed is more or less a time-based concept. So imagine your shutter speed is 1 minute, for example. It opens up for 1 minute, and after that minute, it closes back. And I want to take a picture of somebody, running across the frame. In a few seconds, the person would have crossed the frame. So if you think about it, would the shutter be able to capture anything of that person while it's still trying to take a frame for 1 minute? It may not be able to capture that. Things happen in splits of seconds. And so when you start to speed up the shutter, you speed it up to the point where you can begin to capture some of this motion. In terms of the behavior of the shutter speed, this is the second theory. The faster the shutter speed, the easier it is to capture motion. And the slower the shutter speed, the harder it is to capture motion. Nothing is wrong, nothing is right. This can be applied in so many different ways, which I will still talk about. But you still have to understand this theory first, that the easier it is to capture motion is when you speed up the shutter speed. However, in the area of light, you would notice that as you still speed up the shutter speed, the picture gets darker. Now, as you speed up the shutter speed, say to 1 second, for example, your shutter speed is 1 second. I could still move or wave my hand faster than 1 second. So would you really capture any motion of my hand waving? No, what most likely will happen is you'll get like a blur of my hand waving within that 1 second. So in order to capture my hand waving, maybe we need half of a second, or maybe we need 1/3 of a second, or 1/8 of a second. And by the time you check your camera, you start to see 1/50, 1/60, which means 1/50th of a second, 1/60th of a second. And those are really fast speeds. And you're wondering, what can be moving so fast that I would need to set my shutter speed to 1/60? Think about it. What would really be so fast? I think you should actually practice that. Try that out. And you would see that, oh, most of the things in this world actually move really fast until when you, as the artist, captures that moment in time. It's so interesting. So as you go around your day, take your camera, increase the shutter speed, and see, start to shoot things that are moving. It may be the car, it may be the birds, or even somebody like a model that you get in front of your friend, your family, your sister, your brother, whatever, and tell them to start making a lot of movement, and you start to practice some of these things. So imagine a scenario where you have a wedding scenario where a bride is about to throw a bouquet. And this is a situation where a lot of motion is happening. You have expressions, you have emotions, you have people that are about to catch it, and some of the bridesmaids are giving off all their emotions. You want to capture that motion, right? So in that situation, you want to use a faster shutter speed. There are other ways you can apply shutter speed even on the other end of the spectrum. Maybe you want things to actually be blurry. There are situations where you want things to be blurry so much they become so smooth. In areas like long exposure, in areas like maybe you're shooting water and you want the water to get smooth, you want to use longer exposures, to actually, elevate those things. There are situations where the light is really dark and you want to expose it more because you need more light. So you use longer exposures. One of the hacks, you do in that situation is that maybe you put the camera on a tripod so it's not shaking, right? And then the camera itself is not creating the blur. So in those situations, you also want to use, a slow shutter speed. So it's very interesting how you can apply some of these theories, but just understand, once you understand these basic elements of it, over time, you begin to learn how to apply them. So guys, if we are to establish what we've spoken about the shutter speed today, the first thing we're going to establish right here is that the faster the shutter speed, the darker the picture gets. And the slower the shutter speed, the brighter the picture gets. But in terms of the personal behavior of the shutter speed, as you increase the shutter speed, the easier it is to capture motion. And as you reduce the speed, the harder it is to capture motion. And as we've also learned that this can be applied on both ends of the spectrum. You want to capture motion in some situations and then you use a fast shutter speed. And in the night or in some situations where you want to do long exposure, and you should even see the effects of light in long exposure, it can create stunning results with your camera. So obviously, these are some of the things that you need to understand about the shutter speed. So as I've said before, being able to create a very perfect relationship between the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed is what really would help you own your skills as a photographer. If you remember the ideology we spoke about earlier on, you have the lights, you have the hole, and you have the receiver. Now that hole, in terms of the size of the hole, is what we would call the aperture. In the next video, we'll be talking about the aperture, where we'll then finalize, everything, these three elements of the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. And then we'll talk about how this relationship between these three exists and how you can actually find a balance and, how to mix them together to actually create that image that you're looking for. So, if you're out there and you've tried some of these things, please let me know in the comments what your results were. And you can like this video, to help me explode. But anyways, this is just the beginning. We'll be talking about the aperture in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the post notification button so that you can be notified, anytime I post those videos.